Wa idza kanat al-ummah al-islamiyah turidu an takuna sya'ban mutaqaddiman laisa lahum ikhtiyarun illa bitaghayyuril ijtimaiyah wa tataghayyurul ijtimaiyah bi tahawuli taqofiyah wa taghayyur taqofiyah bi tahawuli ta'alim ad-diniyah. Masalah nadribu al-ilmu. Al-ilmu fi aktsaril muslimin dimakna idrakul ma'arifis salimati wal hukmu. Al-hukmu fi usulil fikhi dimakna kitabullah al-muta'alliqu bi af'alil mukallafin sawa'un kana wat'an am taklifan am tahyiran. Ada maknan min ma'anil ilmi wal hukmi. Idza ta'ammalna al-Qur'an lahuma maknan akhar. Kama fil mujadalah yarfa'illahu alladziina aamanu minkum walladziina utul ilma darajat. Al ilmu yarfa'u darajatil ladziina aamanu wa darajat jam'un yadullu ala darajati jami'i majalatil hayati bi qita'atiha kulliha. Wal hukmu fil Qur'an yadullu ala annal hukmal Qur'aniyya hukman adlan. Katsirum minal ayat yadullu ala dzalika. Wali maqasid daurun kabirun fi bina'i maknal al-jadidah lil ilmi wal hukmi. Walidzalika nurahibu Majelis Tarjih fi kulli surur biqa'i bil Ustad Dr. Jasser Auda. Likai Majelis Tarjih ya'mala dan jauh khususan fi iddati kitabi fiqhil muhadarah wa dirasat usmatul ulum ad-diniyah al-islamiyah. Fi hahuna Assalamualaikum wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Syukran Ustaz. We say thanks very much to Ustaz Hamim Ilyas, who has opened our ceremony with his speech, and he has made it very clear to us that today, as the Muslim society face a very serious challenge, then we have to face it by what he calls tahawul fikr. And In order to do that, one of the method that we can find the Maqasid method, and that we will learn more about that from Dr. Jasser Auda and Dr. Rofiq Muzakkir. The next speaker would Ustaz Muhammad Rofiq Muzakkir LCFA. Ustaz Rofiq obtained his middle school in Madrasah Muhammadiyah Jakarta, and then he pursued his undergraduate study in Islamic law at Al Azhar University, Egypt, and then in Gajah Mada University, and he obtained his Ph.D. from Arizona State University, and finished it in 2022. And Ustaz Rofiq would be speak about integration between tradition and modernity as part of our effort to face modernity and revive the knowledge tradition. That's okay, Ustaz. Bagaimana Ustaz, sudah siap? Okay. Okay, maybe it's okay if I repeat. Ustaz Rofiq would be talk about integration between tradition and modernity. So that's his topic. Tafadhal Ustaz.
Before I start my presentation, I would like to let you know I got an information from the committee that the snacks are ready. You can pick up anytime. Make this room as your home. Feel comfortable. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Allahumma lakal hamdu kulluh wa lakas syukru kulluh. Allahumma lakal hamdu hatta tarda wa lakal hamdu idza radit wa lakal hamdu ba'da ridha. Allahumma shalli wa sallim ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man sara ala nahjihi ila yaumil qiyamah. Amma ba'du. I would like to begin my presentation by expressing my gratitude to our main speaker today, Dr. Jasser Auda, Syekhuna Al-Jalil, Sheikh Jasser Auda. I'm always proud to say that I'm his student, and literally I'm his student. I took a course with him back in 2018 in Virginia, and I took a course as well in, if I'm not mistaken, back in 2016. It was in a hotel next to Win. So I'm a student, and we are happy today to have him in our forum today. And in fact, for us in Muhammadiyah, this is the third time we have him in our academic forum. In 2016 as well, we, especially in Majelis Tarjih, invited him to give a speak on ijtihad. It was during his presentation. He was giving, a public lecture in front of audience. I believe it was Ph.D. It was a big hotel, bigger than this, and we kidnap him. We bring him to a separate room, and we ask him to speak to the audience, and mainly they are from Majelis Tarjih. And then the second time, the second occasion we have him, it was last year, just literally last year. So during the launching of our new center, we asked him to speak again, and particularly to speak about his latest publication, Re-Envisioning Islamic Scholarship. Can I have it for a while? So to show you about this book, now this is really good book. You have to try to find this book, Re-Envisioning Islamic Scholarship, Maqasid Methodology as a New Approach, published a year ago or two years ago, 2 years ago. And we in the center have discussed this book extensively. Last night, I asked one of our admin, our staff, to bring the newsletter that we just published, where in this newsletter, we discuss in a great length the idea of Maqasid, the idea of, reforming knowledge, Islamic philosophy from this book. So I would suggest you to read this book. And this book is not only meaningful for the scholar of Islamic studies, regardless of your background, whether you are doctor, engineer, psychologist, you can take benefit from this book. So Alhamdulillah, we have discussed this book, and during the launching, we also asked him to speak about this book. And then today, we will have him again to speak in front of us. The issue today is about modernity. Well, I'll speak later on about modernity, but let me address our second guest today. We have Dr. Zaid Barzanji. Assalamualaikum, Dr. Zaid Barzanji. Would you please to stand up so the audience can see you? Yes, he's from Nashville, Tennessee. I've never been there, but I said to him I went to Memphis, and he's here with his son Hassan, the good-looking guy in the back. I said to him, you need to look around to see how beautiful Jogja is. And thank you for coming to our meeting. We are happy to have you as well. And he's a professor of economic and Islamic studies as well. And also let me again to thank our leader, Rais Majelis Tarjih, Pak Hamim Ilyas, for being with us. And we make a dua, may Allah give him and all of us healthy and cure the sickness and give us all of us a barakah. And Pak Hamim today was talking about the transformation of Islamic society from agricultural society to, industrial society. And Maqasid is an important device, an important instrument, philosophical tool that can help us transform ourselves to what he called today, or he just mentioned, industrial society. And then he also mentioned that we in Majelis Tarjih have programs that in line with today's meeting. We, set a plan that we want to write a book on tafsir. Theology amal peradaban, theology of civilization. So our meeting today could be one step, the first step to achieve that plan to write a book on the fiqhul hadarah. And also he was mentioning the idea that we also have a plan to write a book on the crisis of knowledge in Islam. So it is just literally the content of this book. So we have the right professor at the right time. Again, thank you for Pak Hamim, and I would like also to take this opportunity to briefly introduce to you our new center. We call it in Indonesian pronunciation CISIC, but it shouldn't be CISIC, it should be CISIC, but it's too hard to pronounce in Indonesian tongue. So we call it just CISIC. It stands for Center for Integrative Science and Islamic Civilization, established just last year by Board of Trustee, Majelis Umana. The main task of this center is to formulate the paradigm of integration, and also not only at the conceptual level, we also get an assignment from the university to make sure that all departments, faculties, lecturers approach the knowledge from Islamic epistemology. So at the first level, we are working on the conceptual level, and then a second level, at the practical level, we need to collaborate, we need to talk, have a conversation with lecturers, ensure that they teach sciences from the Islamic perspective. Now, let me begin my presentation by explaining about the outlines that I'm going to be talking about. Next slide. So many topics. I'm not sure I can touch all of them extensively, but at least I can, briefly allude, mention those 4 topics. The first main question is the ontological question: what is modernity? Again, as I said before, that the main preoccupation today is how to deal with modernity, and Maqasid will be the solution, an answer to that question. But before we get there, let me make a definition what is modernity. And we have 2 minor questions. Is it inherently European project, European product, or it is universal notion? And then the second minor question, is it inherently bad? Modernity is always bad, or something that we can say it is natural? It's up to you. You can use it for the good end or for the bad end. And then the second one, the second Greek question is regarding Greek Western transmutation. Well, this term sounds unfamiliar to some of you probably. I will explain in due course, in due time. But this term is invented by a scholar, by a historian by the name of Marshall Hodgson. Basically, it refers to tremendous effect of modernity. How the change in the Western society also changed the entire world. How the change in the world also brought tremendous change worldwide. And then we have 2 issues here. We have the issue of epistemological crisis and then empirical crisis. This book have talked a lot about the issue of epistemological crisis. And then the next issue, how to deal with modern problems. What I'm suggesting in this occasion is that we need to employ what I call as Islamic normativity and then historicity. What I mean by Islamic normativity is that we need to always look at the Quran and the Sunnah. It is undisputable. It is source of inspiration. It is source of a concrete norm. We need to look at the Quran and Sunnah, but it's not enough. We can take also benefit from Islamic intellectual tradition. So the word historicity refers to the legacy of Islamic intellectualism, or what we can call as a concrete term or technical term as At-Turath al-Islami. So I'm suggesting that as a scholar, we need to engage both the Quran and Sunnah and the legacy of a Muslim scholar. And then if I have time, I'll also be speaking about the importance of Islamic intellectual tradition, how it is significant, important for us, and then what can we do as a lecturers in university. Okay, next. Ontological question, basic question. What is modernity? Mahiyal hadatha. There are 2 ways to approach this question. One, modernity is just a time. It is an epoch, a time that comes after traditional time. But the question is, when does it begin? Some people say, well, it is in 15th century, after the Reformation launched by Martin Luther. Some people say it is after the religious war between Protestantism and Catholicism, or after the Westphalia Treaty, And for Muslim territory, modernity start at different time. For Egypt, for example, modern time began after the arrival of who is the military commander from France, Napoleon Bonaparte in 1989 or 17, well, 2 years before 1800. So the first approach to define modernity is just a time. The second approach, modernity is a set of ideas, new ideas. What are the ideas that define modernity? The idea of progress, at-tanmiyah wa taqaddum. The idea of progress in and of itself is not negative. Our leader, Rais Majelis Tarjih today even mentioned the idea that we need to transform to al-ijtima at-tanmiyah, the idea of tanmiyah. But the issue is that sometimes the idea of progress also bring negative judgment about the past. So the idea of progress look at the past as stupidity, barbarism, backwardness. So sometimes the idea of progress is also not natural, very European, and very Western minded. So modernity could be defined as a set of ideas. The first one is progress. The second one, you might add a break from the past, a break from the tradition. Basically, it is just an idea. The second one, next. This is also philosophical questions. The origin of modernity. So, is modernity something universal? Meaning, you don't need to look at where does it come from, the origination of modernity. It's just reality today. Now, we have a I think it's very insightful book, Reforming Modernity, published around 3 years ago by this non-Muslim scholar, Wa'al Bihalab, summarizing the philosophical idea of Toha Abdurrahman. And regarding the debate about the origin of modernity, we have two views here. For Wa'al Bihalab, modernity is always Western project. It has nothing to do with Muslim scholar. For the West, it is organic. It grows up from their history. But for Muslim and the rest of the world, modernity, it is something coming from outside. It comes to us by enforcement, by colonization. And for Halab, modernity is always European. But Toha Abdurrahman has more optimistic view. No. We cannot restrict the origin of modernity to Western history. For him, there are multiple modernities. Hunaka imkanat muta'addidah. Idza kana hunaka al-hadatsa al-gharbiyah fayajuzu lana ayyakuna ladaina al-hadatsa al-islamiyah, al-hadatsa al-misriyah, al-iraqiyah, al-hadatsa al-mahalliyah in Jogja, for example. There are multiple modernities. It is true that what we see today is Western modernity, but we still have a chance to reverse it, to change it, to Islamize the modernity. That's why the book is given the title by Halak as Reforming Modernity. What we see today is, the manifestation of modernity, but it is not the end of the history. We can change it into becoming more Islamic. The next one. And for Toha, Halak, you are very pessimistic, Halak. For you, modernity is always bad. You don't give any solution because we are living in modern period. We are living in modern time. If you are condemning modernity, so what is the solution? What is the alternative? You give us no choice, Halak. What is the answer from Toha himself? he himself bring us to the idea that we need to Islamize modernity. Melakukan Islamisasi kepada modernitas. Dan the next one. Too far. Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. This is the following question. Is it inherently harmful for Muslim for halak? Yes. I mean, his book, The Impossible State, is just summarizing the idea that there is nothing we can benefit from modernity. If you want to live, try to make a different period of time. Go out from modernity and try to build new period. You can call it, what is that? Reformation period, new order, but not modernity. But please use your agency. Use your capacity as a Muslim to create your own time. Don't let yourself to be just a victim of someone else's philosophy. That is basically the idea of halak. But for Toha, well, modernity is not necessarily bad. I mean, we can Islamize the current modernity, but the idea of modernity is still there. We can retain, we can maintain it. We don't need to come back to the history. Don't be so nostalgic. That is the idea of Toha. Next one. Okay, this is the second major topic that I want to address. Catastrophic impact of modernity, or tremendous negative effect of modernity. How the world is revolutionized by modernity. We have two issues here, epistemological crisis and then empirical crisis. Next one. I believe Dr. Jasser will be speaking in a good line about the idea of epistemological crisis. I also learned from him that we have the issue of takkik here, the issue of nihilism, deconstructionism. Everything become halal today for some people. For those who embrace post-modernity or post-modernism, there is no such a thing as haram. Everything become halal. There is no standard right or wrong. And this is the impact of, Western modern philosophy. I just mentioned to him in the car on our way to this meeting room, we are having we are having a big issue about the issue of LGBTQ. You know what was the response of Dr. Jasser? Oh my God, anywhere I go, I get the same question. So the issue of LGBT is not only our local issue, Indonesian issue, it is a global issue. It is a global issue. For those of you who have a background from UMY, these recent days, just the last 3 days, we have a very sad news about student. I don't know, but the rumor is there, still connected to our topic today. But I mean, those who commit this type of, behavior, they can be very violent. And Dr. Zaid, please address this issue. Globally, you have states in America. It will trickle down to us. Help us understanding this issue. Help us to find a problem. But we in here have the same issue as well. We have the issue of nihilism and epistemic rupture. And then the next one, let's go to the empirical crisis. We have a list, a set of questions. You have the issue of environment, the issue of ethic, morality, the issue of, extremism. I mean, it's just countless. The issue of, alcoholism, is so on and so forth. It's also the manifestation of, modernity. So modernity is not always a positive. It has different side of, the face of the modernity. This is what I want to suggest. We sometimes in the Muhammadiyah are very proud of calling ourselves as modernist organization? Well, we need to rethink. We need to reconsider calling ourselves a modernist Muslim, because modernity, it stands alone without tradition, without religion, that this is the reality. So I would suggest that we call ourselves traditionalists and modernists at the same time. We need to combine these two paradigms. It cannot stay separately. Okay, next one. This is a Triple IT's book, one of the latest publication. I would also suggest all of us to read this book, because this book helps us to think empirically, to think, way ahead of us. It's called Future Studies. We need to understand our current reality, what are our problems today, and we need to project the reality to the future, and then see if we let the situation as it is without changing it, the problem is going to be accumulating, and it's going to be worse, and then it's destructive. So we need to understand the reality from statistical view. You can use, science of statistics. You can use humanities, sociology, for example. It helps us understand the problems today, and then you project it to the future, and then you create the scenario how to change the reality. Because we claim as, al-Islam at-taqaddumi, Islam berkemajuan, then one way to define Islam berkemajuan is we need to create our own future by engaging with this new field. Well, it's not really new, future studies. Next one. Okay, just this is one example of the statistic. Next one. Well, this is my proposal to deal with modern problems. We need to engage with normative Islam. I've explained it. Normative Islam meaning we need to put Quran, the Sunnah as the center of our attention. Our academic activity, daily activity needs to revolve around the Quran and Sunnah. This is the literal word that I get from Dr. Jasser Auda. Everything just yaduru hawla al-Quran wa Sunnah. And it is, mizan, things that we used to judge historical Islam. But please don't put aside historical Islam. We need to read, what we call here yellow book or Kutubut Turos. The reason we call it yellow book, because in the past it was published in a yellow paper. We call here Kitab Kuning, Dr. Zaid. But please, we need to be familiar with these books. If you don't understand Arabic, please learn Arabic, because we have so, important legacies that we just put aside. Now, the way we think is just very Western-minded. Our epistemology, our methodology is very Western. Please work hard, try to reclaim Islamic legacy, Islamic Torah. Then, next one. This is 6 reasons why we need to engage with intellectual tradition. I don't think I need to explain it now, but I would be happy to explain it if you ask why Torah is important. But for the sake of simplicity, we have the next speaker. I'll just leave this explanation later on. And then the last one. So I suggest, this is my argument, all lecturers, because my audiences here are mainly docent, al-mudarrisun fil jami'at, professors in the university. I'll suggest that all lecturers from any department in UMBA, well, not only UMBA, UAD, we have so many backgrounds here, should be familiar with Islamic intellectual tradition, in addition to familiar with the Quran and Sunnah. This is why we have our speaker today, Dr. Jasser Auda, because the Maqasid as a methodology combine both. Maqasid make us stand on the Quran and Sunnah, and then also Maqasid also encourage us to respect intellectual tradition. The idea of Maqasid, as we know, is not new. It's been there since Al-Ghazali, Al-Juwayni, Al-Shatibi. It's coming from our history, it's coming from our turos. So this is also what I listened, what I heard from Dr. Jasser Auda. We have, chemistry, we can call it, between Muhammadiyah and Dr. Jasser. He feel at home with Muhammadiyah because we are welcoming the idea of Maqasid because it is really fit with what we want. It is Maqasid. I'll stop here. Just an introduction for our good speaker, Dr. Jasser Auda. Again, thank you very much for being with us. And I'll give the microphone to you. So thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Ustad Rofiq, for delivering the very engaging lecture. And Ustad Rofiq has told us about the challenge of modernity in terms of epistemic crisis and empirical crisis. And he has mentioned two names, Halak and Halak and Taha Abdul Rahman, with their contrasting views on modernity. And now we will learn the view of our very own Professor Jasser Auda. The title of his talk today would be Maqasid as a framework for the Ummah's cultural compatibility with modernity. So there is an assumption here that compatibility with modernity is possible, at least if we use the right framework. That is the Maqasid framework. Because without framework, we would become the how to say, everything is halal. The problem that Ustaz Rofiq has mentioned before. So that's why the framework is very important, and that's why I will just let Professor Jasser Auda. And even though it will be an honor for me to introduce him, I don't think he needs further introduction for us. But just for he is the chairman of the Maqasid Institute, and members of the institute are present with us here today. The Maqasid Institute is a global think tank based on London, UK, with educational and research projects in a dozen other countries. He is a professor and Al-Shatibi Chair of Maqasid Studies at the International Peace College, South Africa, and a visiting professor for the study of Islam at Charlotte University in Canada, and Rofiq's teacher. Okay. Our teacher, تفضل أستاذ.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أسعد خلقه وخاتم رسله محمد صلى الله عليه وآله، ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ثم أما بعد. It is always a pleasure to be back in Jogja. Always a pleasure whenever I come to Jogja to meet our ahbab and our beloved brothers and sisters, inshallah, from Muhammadiyah. And as Dr. Rofiq is saying, there is a chemistry, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, as we say in the Arabic poetry, that our water comes from the same cloud. So it's تحضر من غمام واحد. So we are water coming from the same cloud. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for us to benefit each other, learn from each other in this dunya, and to be there in His mercy in the real life. I start by thanking you for inviting me and your hospitality. I want to thank Ustad Hamid. Yes, barakallahu fi wa fi umri wa hafidhahu Allah. on his remarks, and I find that these remarks are quite essential for us to have a framework. He is talking about التحرر الثقافي, the cultural freedom or the cultural emancipation of us as Muslims, and he linked that to تحرر التعليم الديني, and therefore the emancipation of the religious education. And he talked about العلوم الإسلامية, and I will talk about العلوم الإسلامية as well, but in my definition that I expanded in this humble book, that every علوم is علوم إسلامية. العلوم الإسلامية is not only التفسير والحديث والفقه and so forth والدعوة. العلوم الإسلامية is also psychology and architecture and political science and you name it, natural, social, applied sciences and humanities. Under any of that, all of these are علوم إسلامية. And in fact, I believe in the restructuring of this division into a different paradigm of dealing with knowledge. And this is the conclusion of this book that is published by the Maqasid Institute in partnership with our publisher in the UK, Claritas. And this book is the outcome of the research that we do in the Maqasid Institute. I am the author of the book, but I'm not the only source of its ideas. It's a collective work, not just people in the Maqasid Institute, researchers and professors, but also Muslims everywhere. And our discussions everywhere in various countries around the world contributed to this. So we're saying that we should not only deal with knowledge in terms of this division of natural, applied, humanities, and social sciences, but rather try to shift the approach to knowledge into a phenomena-based approach. And therefore, we study phenomena rather than studying disciplines. And this is a restructuring that cannot happen in one day or 1 year or 1 decade. It will need time. But basically, our approach is not deconstruction and is not traditional, but rather reconstruction of the tradition. And that reconstruction is in light of the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the Sunnah being a bayan of the Quran or an illustration of the Quran. Modernity came, as my brother Dr. Rofiq mentioned, with colonization. And colonization tried to shape the Muslim mind before it tried to shape the Muslim society. The colonization is not just a time and it's not just ideas, it is actually a system. It's a system that has a number of manifestations. They call it economically and politically and so forth in terms of these sciences that we're talking about. These sciences are in the heart of that system. These sciences are a reality today. And of course, there is an approach of al-Hadatha al-Islamiyya or Islamic modernity, not just Dr. Taha Abdul Rahman, but the whole genre of the Madrasa al-Wasatiyya in general. Al-Madrasa al-Wasatiyya or the centrist school is dealing with al-Hadatha as a fact and trying to Islamize. So we Islamize the state by putting some sentences in the constitution. We Islamize the bank by trying to eliminate the interest or going around the interest. And then we call it an Islamic bank. And we Islamize the political parties and we Islamize tourism and food and so forth. So whatever we have, we try to Islamize. And there were different approaches of Islamization. Some of them are very relaxed, as we saw in the presentation, and they feel that this is just a normal progress, especially the circles that are close to politics and trying to serve the current political status quo. And some other people are less comfortable with the political status quo, and therefore they try to change through the Islamization. So the same good old institutions, but the Islamic institutions are trying to push a little bit back in terms of the politics of the time and the economics of the time, but within the same paradigm. And then you have the school of the alternative thinking, as my brother Rofiq mentioned about Professor Hallaq and others, who say to Muslims, well, you have to change, you have to have an alternative paradigm. They are aware that it's a paradigm and they're calling for an alternative paradigm. But unfortunately, they don't answer the very important question of how. How can we have an alternative paradigm? And especially people who are aware, who are non-Muslim, as the example is, and they don't come from the same sources that we have. What we're trying to do in the Maqasid project is to come from the sources of Islam in order to envision an alternative paradigm. But we are not proposing the idea that the alternative paradigm is going to happen tomorrow or is going to happen in an isolation from the current paradigm. But basically what we need is a strategy of restructuring the current paradigm. The current paradigm is here. How can we restructure it? How can we redefine it? How can we work in parallel lines? Some of them are in peace with the paradigm and every manifestation of it, but is trying to Islamize part of it. That is an important strategy. But part of it is trying to reshape and redefine the paradigm and redefine the institutions that were based on the paradigm. And another part of it that tries to push back the paradigm and try to change the balance of power in whenever possible means. Because at the end, it is a question of the balance of power. And it is the question of the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, whether it is willing to do jihad or not. Jihad, not necessarily in terrorism, since we're not talking here about bombing malls or doing these kinds of violent acts that do not take us anywhere, but jihad as in pushing back a paradigm that is currently making the societies degrade and disintegrate towards morality that is not Islamic, making the economy seeing an incredible gap between the rich and the poor. The exact thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, كَيْ لَا يَكُونَ دُولَةً بَيْنَ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ مِنْكُمْ. So the wealth doesn't circulate only amongst the rich. We're moving very fast towards the wealth that is only circulating amongst the rich, and the poor are just working for their food. And a paradigm that looks at the psychology of the human being in a particular way has nothing to do with Islam, and looks at the architecture of cities and buildings and so on in a way that contradicts with many of the Islamic fundamentals. A paradigm that has many, many issues. But how can we change? How can we go about the issue of changing the paradigm? It's not efficient and it's not effective to call for a social revolution as we tried in the Arab Spring back in the Arab world 10 years ago, now 12 years ago. It's not effective to do that because if you had not known that before the experience, now you know from the experience that governments are not going to allow this to happen. Not just governments in the Muslim world, governments where the hard power exists is not going to allow a reshaping of the paradigm by people, civilians going out in the streets and changing the system. It's not going to happen this way. There has to be a bottom-up change. And many people called for that back then, but their voices were not listened to because their voices did not go with the politics of the time anyway and what was planned But basically, what we need to do is to work with the Ummah of Islam in order to make this restructuring. And the working with the Ummah of Islam has to start from the core of the identity of the Ummah of Islam. And the core of our identity is the Book of Allah and the character of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wherever you go and whatever fiqh you develop, or fikr, or kalam, or falsafa, or whatever it is, at the end, it's the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is what defines us as Muslims. And the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of Muhammad, how can we try to re-envision a new world? How can we try to restructure the paradigm that we have? We in the Maqasid Institute, and it's a humble effort to serve this Ummah, we're proposing the idea that we need to restructure knowledge. We have to start from knowledge. And how can we restructure knowledge if we have the same division of the branches of knowledge, and within these divisions we have an epistemology? So you cannot do economics outside the epistemology of economics. You cannot do architecture outside, the French Renaissance. You cannot do psychology outside either Freud or Maslow or Darwin or any of the definitions of the human being. You cannot do arts outside the schools of arts that we have. We are saying that, no, this is something that has to change, because these branches of knowledge are not natural. They are the core of the project. And the way education teaches them in order to meet certain economic ends is not the way Islamic education should do. Islamic education should aim at the liberation, emancipation, the power, the authority, the shahada, to use a Quranic word, of the Ummah of Islam. How can the Ummah of Islam do the shahada over people? That shahada, or witnessing over people, means that the Ummah of Islam should set the standard of morality, the standard of good governance, the standard of good economics, what we mean by development, what we mean by progress. We should define these things. And I'm speaking in English, but then part of the redefinition is actually to define the Quranic terms, the Arabic terms, basically. Arabic is not the language of Arabs. Arabic is the language of Islam. So to define our Arabic terms and not just translate development into tanmiyah and human rights into huquq al-insan, no, but to re-envision a new conceptual framework, a different conceptual framework that defines value based on the Quran, because mafahim al-Quran, or the Quranic concepts, have authority, have sultan. إن هي إلا أسماء سميتموها ما أنتم وآباؤكم ما أنزل الله بها من سلطان، or ما نزل الله بها من سلطان. Asma in the Quran, the kalimat in the Quran, have to start to be our vocabulary. And the rest of the vocabulary should go under these asma. So if you are talking about democracy, is this a Quranic concept? No, it isn't. What in the Quran could govern democracy? And tell us what is good in democracy and what is not. How can we learn something from democracy that could be better for the Ummah? And how can we reject something from democracy that is not good for the Ummah? Democracy, for example, is very good for the alternation of power. We have a chronic problem of alternation of power from the middle of the 1st century, Hijri. And it is a very useful idea. I remember our Shaykh, rahimahullah, Shaykh Muhammad al-Ghazali, in one of his lessons, he said, imagine that the Sahaba sat down and said, we're going to do an election. And the nominees are Ali and Muawiyah. And see whoever elects and solve the problem. Wouldn't this be better than fighting? And then after the fight is over, we have 80 years of Bani Umayyah and then Bani al-Abbas. He envisioned something that looks like democracy. That's something that we can benefit from. Al-hikmatu dalatul mu'min. The wisdom is the lost property of the believer. Wherever we find wisdom. But on the other hand, democracy is proving to us that the mob is very dangerous. and that the media shapes the mob, and the mob elects the president or whatever it is. And if you look at the scandal that happened in the last American election and how some companies bought the profiles of people from Facebook and therefore was able to change some of the minds, millions of minds, by targeting them on Facebook, by targeting the reality and shaping the reality in a particular way, just because they bought the profiles of Facebook. Now, this is a problem of democracy. The impact of money and wealth on the outcomes of democracy is a big problem. So when we look at that, and this is a simple example, we could look at how can we restructure, how can we benefit from that? Civilizations go this way. They benefit from the previous civilizations and they build on them. We did that during the time of the Islamic civilization's rise. Regardless of the problems with politics, the Muslim Ummah rose and the Muslim civilization rose. The politics was not as bright as the science of the Ummah and the society of the Ummah and the trade of the Ummah. And when we rose, we did something brilliant. We brought everything, the Indian scripts and the Greek scripts and the African scripts, and the Abbasides at that time would give gold for people who translate. We built on the hikmah of others, and therefore we were able to stand on the previous civilization. Nobody starts from scratch. And they did the same thing. They learned what a hospital is, and what a foundation is, and what, even like basic stuff, tea and coffee and soap. And like when you look into the Muslim civilization, how it impacted Europe, and how Europe, from the little utensils to the major ideas, look at the impact of Ibn Khaldun and Ibn Rushd on the philosophers of the Renaissance. They might not admit it, but I was reading the other day about Newton and how he learned from a Latin translation of the Arabic books of Bayt al-Hikmah in Baghdad. Now that the library of Newton, Isaac Newton, is out, it's very interesting how he learned from Ibn al-Haytham and from the others who talked about gravity even before him, and how we built on their theory, even though they wouldn't admit that. And he even rejected Christianity itself. He has a paper, I have it in PDF, very interesting, about the Summit of Nicaea and how it changed Christianity from Jesus being a prophet to Jesus being a God. And he was saying that he was Aryan. He did not believe that Jesus is a God. Isaac Newton, very interesting. So we need this kind of approach. But how? The Europeans had sources in secularism, laicite, the way they define the world, they define knowledge. We should define the world and knowledge through the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And from that, we need to build on other people's civilization. We need to build on the other ideas. And the change of the ideas, it's not just a philosophical exercise. But when we change the economics, we need to go and change the institutions and the systems that are based on that. And this is a process that requires strategizing. That is why in the Maqasid Institute, we have 4 circles of research. One we call Usul studies. The Usul studies is the study of the Quran and the Sunnah, and the rethinking about tafsir and hadith and fiqh, because these are the usul of our knowledge. And then we have disciplinary studies, in which we're saying that you come from a particular discipline, your objective is to restructure the discipline at the higher level. And at the lower level is to restructure, change the application of the system. The application is the lower level of thinking. At the higher level of thinking, you need to change the theories upon which archaeology, anthropology, architecture, psychology is built, the basic theories. But then the third circle, we're saying that we have a phenomena-based studies, which means that we want to change the paradigm of knowledge. We want to direct our researchers not to study economics and politics and so on, but to study a phenomenon, pandemics, poverty, global warming, a phenomenon on the ground. And if you study a phenomenon, you will realize that pandemics is not just a medical research. You cannot just say that the Islamic approach to pandemics is whether the vaccine has halal ingredients. This is not about Sharia compliance. When you look at the pandemics as a phenomenon, politically and economically, the hospitals and the way we deal with animals and the environment, the way we deal with food, the way we distribute the resources of these nation states that we have today, so that our medical system could sustain a pandemic or cannot sustain a pandemic. And then when we look at the phenomena, you realize that we need a multidimensional, multidisciplinary, even transdisciplinary approaches in order to deal with the phenomena of poverty or the phenomena of this change in the environment and so forth. And then as Muslims, we start to convert the research on the phenomena into institutions. We have to start to have ministries of poverty and ministries of global warming and ministries of pandemic, instead of dividing the world into a paradigm that does not help because it belongs to a different civilization. And at the end, we will never be Europe because we have a very different history and a very different outlook on life. And trying to imitate Europe is going to make us always backward. And that's what happened to them when the Muslim civilization from North Africa and Africa all the way to China and India and East Asia here was higher. They were trying to imitate us. And when they spoke Arabic and when they copied from Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd and Razi and Farabi, and these were the textbooks, they were behind us because they were trying to catch up with our paradigm. But when they said, okay, let us redefine Ibn Rushd, they even removed Ibn Rushd from the history at all. And now they say that, well, gravity is Isaac Newton and medicine is this and that and mathematics. Well, they kept the word algorithm and the word algebra. And that's why some people might say, oh, Jabir ibn Hayyan, al-Khwarizmi, but most people don't know that. They even rewrote their history in order for them to build modernity or the Renaissance and what came afterwards in a way that totally suited their paradigm, what they wanted to do with their lives. And we need to, as Muslims, do that in terms of benefiting from the hikmah of others, but also restructuring knowledge, redefining disciplines. We cannot go by the same disciplines, otherwise we will continue to be in the same paradigm. And the fourth circle that we study in the Maqasid Institute, what we call strategic studies. And yes, strategy sciences is one of the sciences that we need to restructure. But in strategic studies, we're trying to strategize for the Ummah. We could strategize for companies or for states. And this is fine and good that every state has to have its strategists and every race, you know, the whites strategize for themselves, obviously. And some Africans think about Africa, etc. But we need to have a strategy for the Muslim Ummah because very few people, if any, think about how to strategize for the Ummah, how to have a way of changing the Ummah's reality, a change that comes from the reality, but the ideas come from the sources outside reality. We have to deal with the reality as it is, but we cannot be apologetic about the reality. And the problem with the Islamic modernity and the Wasatiyah and a lot of the Islamization kind of projects is the apologism about the reality, giving legitimacy to systems that are not legitimate from the Islamic perspective, and being happy with partial gains from these systems or partial benefits to some Islamic projects. And this is very good, but this is not enough. It's important as we legitimize some systems that are not legitimate, is to also work in parallel so that the alternative could start to emerge. it is very important that we emerge alternatives on the ground. And the alternatives that we need to emerge have to start from emerging ideas, the new ideas, the transformation of knowledge into phenomena-based studies, and the rereading of the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Quickly, the rereading of the Quran, we are proposing a different way of reflecting upon the Quran, even though it's all from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's nothing outside. We're saying that there are 7 elements that we need to look at in order for an Islamic worldview to be genuine. The first element is the maqasid, or the objectives. So when you open the book of Allah, whether you are an economist or a military scientist, whether you are a psychologist or architect, whether you are a faqih who gives fatwa in the ethical issues, or you are a lawyer who is thinking about the law, when you read the book of Allah, look for the objectives. Because the objectives in the book of Allah, the maqasid, are more prominent than the asbab or the ilal. The maqasid in the Quran is much more prominent as a logic, as a mantiq, than the ilal. But our thinking so far has been ta'lili, has been more about the ratios and the reasons and the past. But when you look at the Quran, seeing where the Quran is trying to take us, what are the maqsood? وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Allah created jinn and ins to worship Him. So worship is a maqsad. Under worship, what should we achieve? التقوى, الشكر, الإصلاح, القسط, العدل, and so forth. There are things, justice and betterment, rectification, islah, etc. As we go and try to reform our reality and reshape our reality, we need to look at the maqasid and read the Quran this way. That's why it's very important to restudy the Quran in terms of the maqasid. Secondly, al-mafahim, or the concepts. Look at the words of the Quran and give them their due authority. Beware of the people who have a problem with what they call sultat al-nas, or the authority of the script. Of course not. The nas has a sultan in Islam, because the nas is Allah speaking, subhanahu wa ta'ala, but not the sultan of those who interpret the nas. The interpreters could be right and could be wrong. The fiqh really could be right and could be wrong. But when Allah talks about al-insan, al-bashar, the human, there is an sultan, there is an authority in that. When you look at the Quran, I will not be long, inshallah. When you look at the rest of the Quran, you will see that the words of the Quran have to start to shape our worldview. We have a myth that says that the Quran is not useful for our reality, or that the Quran cannot be understood unless the hadith explains it. And the hadith, yes, is a bayan of the Quran, but it's not equal to the Quran. Why? Yes, the Prophet ﷺ is a representation of the Quran, but the hadith is cut in a way to deal with fiqh. When you look in the books of hadith, the chapters are chapters of fiqh. Fiqh al-Bukhari fi abwab al-Bukhari. So he says, I take this sentence and I put it under zakat, and I take this sentence and I put it under iman, and this sentence under jihad. That is his fiqh. But when you read the Quran, it's not fragmented this way. There is no scissors in the Quran. The Quran, from the beginning to the end, no cutting. And why do we cut as humans with hadith? Because that's not normal. If I tell you a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ now, I only take the sentence that fits my speech. But the Quran doesn't go like that. The Quran, from the beginning to the end, is integrated, is one whole, is connected. And therefore, the logic by which we approach the Quran should be a logic of connectivity. When you read it, connect everything that has to do with justice in the Quran in order to understand al-qism, al-adl, connect everything that has to do with al-insan, al-bashar, bani Adam, in order to start to understand the human being. If you do psychology or biology, if you do political science or economics, at the heart of it is the definition of the human. The definition of the human so far is Darwinian, is Freudian, but we need to define the human based on the Quran. Look at the Quran, as our Ustad Hamid mentioned, al-hukm. Look at the word al-hukm in order to understand governance and authority. And you look at the dynamics of how al-hukm could be translated. When you read that, do not only look at the do's and the don'ts, al-awamir wal-nawahi. This is just one element. But al-maqasid wal-mafahim are very important in order to understand al-awamir wal-nawahi. If you don't understand the maqsid of the order, then you will misplace the order. And if you don't understand the concept of the order, az-zawaj and nikah in the Quran, if we don't understand az-zawaj as an institution, then we misplace az-zawaj. People will come and define marriage in whatever way, but the Quran defines it in a particular way. And we also focus on as-sunan al-ilahiyyah, the universal laws. And the universal laws are the meta laws. You see, when you strategize for knowledge, there are the meta laws of any science that govern the science. The meta laws of sociology, for example. When people study sociology, they go and study Durkheim, or study Hegel, or study one of the philosophers that they consider the fathers of sociology. We don't have to study Ibn Khaldun only, but Ibn Khaldun as a turath, you mentioned the turath, should be part of our experience as a civilization. But we cannot approach sociology today based on Ibn Khaldun, because Ibn Khaldun is not enough, simply. In order to restructure the sociology as we have it today, yes, we learn from the turath, but we apply the Quran and the Sunnah and brilliant minds in order to restructure the current knowledge. And therefore, al-maqasid wal-mafahim wal-awamir wal-sunan al-ilahiyyah, the meta laws, sunan al-nas, sunan al-hazima, sunan al-taghyir, sunan al-zawjiyya, sunan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ سُنَنٌ فَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. And it's very important for fiqh to align itself with sunan, mura'at al-sunan bil fiqh. And we also propose number 5, al-fi'at, or the parties, the groups. How did the Quran slice the groups, the society? When you read any of the sciences related to societies, social sciences, you find them stratifying the society in a particular way. The Quran stratifies the society differently. These are corruptors and these are reformers. These are males and these are females. These are ulul amr, people of authority, and people who don't have authority. These are tujjar. These are hukam. These the words that mean groups and people in the Quran is important in order to define the society in a certain way. How we define society today? We say celebrities, influencers, diplomats, terrorists, citizens, government officials, public servants. This is good, but this has to be under the definition of fi'at, or of parties in the Quran, because the definition of the fi'at will tell you who from the diplomats is corruptor and who is reformer, who from the influencers is a muslih and who is a mufsid. And the muslihun and the mufsidun is not defined by self-proclamation. Self-proclamation does not define parties in the Quran. We define them. They could say they are muslihun, but Allah is saying, أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ وَلَكِنْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. They are the corruptors. They say we are reformers, but they are the corruptors. So the self-claim of affiliations and identities is not an Islamic thing. That, of course, it is in the heart of the current intellectual paradigm, where people could wake up in the morning and say that they are reformers, or they are believers, or they are even males or females, and they say anything. And because they self-proclaim, then they have the right to self-proclaim. In Islam, this is not true. In Islam, there is an outside criteria by which we judge the reformers from the corruptors, the males from the females, the people of authority from the people who have no authority, the enemies from the friends. Not anybody who says he's a friend is a friend, and so forth. So when you look at the parties as item number 6 here, you will see that we are trying to bring about elements from the Quran in order to stratify the society. And finally, proofs or al-hujjaj. What is the hujjah or the evidence or the proof for truth and the hujjah for falsehood, the fallacy? And in this humble book, there is a section on fallacies. And fallacies is a major problem because people, in the name of hard power, in the name of violence, they define truth and falsehood. But truth and falsehood is not defined by power. أم أنا خير من هذا الذي هو مهين ولا يكاد يبين. This is a pharaonic thing. The pharaoh said, I am stronger, therefore I am the truth. And the pharaoh said, oh, he cannot speak very well, therefore he is falsehood. But Musa is the truth, and the pharaoh is the falsehood. And if you look especially at the dialogue between Musa and Pharaoh in the Quran, you will have a whole paradigm of truth versus falsehood and the dynamics, so that you understand what establishes truth. ما الحجة? What is a hujjah? And what is a fallacy? We have in philosophy fallacies, different fallacies. Some are Islamic and some should be rejected because they are not compatible with the Quranic worldview. So from the logic up, when we build our intellectual paradigm, we should be able to build, inshallah, our civilization. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a sunnah of alternating between people. وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ إِنْ يَمْسَسْكُمْ قَرْحٌ فَقَدْ مَسَّ الْقَوْمَ قَرْحٌ مِثْلُهُ وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ وَلِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَيَتَّخِذَ مِنْكُمْ شُهَدَاءَ وَاللَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الظَّالِمِينَ وَلِيُمَحِّصَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَيَمْحَقَ الْكَافِرِينَ. Surah Al-Imran is very relevant to our times. He is saying, subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are harmed, but they are harmed too. And these days will alternate amongst the people. The civilization that is down today is going to be up at some point, and the civilization that is up today is going down at some point. And this is the nature of life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us. And we as Muslims and people who care about the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, we have to play our role. And as Islamic movements, we have to play our role in preparation for the point when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alternates the authority between civilizations. We have to prepare for that, and we have to take our roles in doing this. And if we don't, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring some other people who will play this role or execute this role. It's very important that we are aware of the challenge and we understand our enemies and our friends in this world. And we understand that we as Muslims have a different paradigm. And yes, we live in a different world from the Islamic world, but we should always be busy how to restructure, how to re-envision, how to remodel our brains and our minds, our hearts, we speak in the Islamic terms, and our bodies and our societies, so that we are shuhada ala nas, we are witnesses over humankind. I hope that these notes are useful, inshallah. It's a long book and a long project that, inshallah, I recommend that you read. We can send copies as much as you want, electronic or paper copies for you. I'll be more than happy to get feedback and for you to participate in this research. Again, Jazakumullah khair, barakallahu fikum for inviting me. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless your movement and bless the good work you do. Every time I come back to Indonesia, mashallah, the movement is growing, organizations are growing, the hotels are getting nicer. And inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless your work and bless your funds and bless your brothers and sisters. Barakallahu fikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Terima kasih banyak, syukur kasih pada Ustadz Jasser Auda yang telah menyampaikan materinya. Bapak dan Ibu yang dirahmati Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, snack sudah tersedia dari tadi kayaknya. Insya Allah belum dingin. Boleh untuk sambil mempersiapkan pertanyaan, menikmati snack yang tersedia, kopi. Ya. Dan kita masuk ke discussion. Ya. We will invite from among the audience. Kami sudah ada Bapak yang mengatakan, kami akan langsung persilahkan. Tapi untuk sesi tanya jawab ini kami sampaikan bahwa silahkan bertanya dalam bahasa Indonesia, bahasa Arab atau bahasa Inggris semuanya di.
Thank you so much, Layum. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very enlightening sharing knowledge that we get from Jasser Auda, also Pak Rofiq. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Rizal Yaya. I'm Dean of Faculty of Economics and Business, Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta. I would like to a bit of my small research. COVID-19. I see that COVID-19 is the big test of which approach will and that see that using Maqasid Sharia with having the that's sorry the problem is how Daruriyah idea were clarified Daruriyah and the idea and the word is in the book of Maqasid Sharia. That shows that give the evidence that organization or country that use that approach, whether they know it or we don't know it, that lead to survival. I've compared some countries which prioritize the daruriyat with the needs of nafs rather than economics, where at the time the debate was which comes first, economic or the life of the people. And some countries choose economics first because they don't want to have the economics going down. But some countries put the life as a priority. Country we use put the life with priority. That's in line with the Maqasid Sharia, with the Daruriyat approach, where the hifz of nafs is more priority. And also, this approach, I see that looking at Muhammadiyah, is very easy to make decision, where suggesting people just to pray Jumat at home rather than in a masjid, where the spread of COVID is very big problem at the time. And then it is very easy people who understand the approach to follow it. But there are some people, Muslim, which do not understand the approach. They keep doing as usual, thinking that going to the masjid is more priority because they do this, the ibadah. So we can see that having the Maqasid Sharia, sticking to that means Muslim. I also see a country which using that approach, like New Zealand, another country, they have low rates of mortality, people who die. But then they can catch up economic after that, when the situation has been controllable. But countries who choose economic, which is not the priority actually, rather economic rather than life, the economic does not even getting better than the country which choose the life as a priority. The case of Norway and Sweden compared to Norway. I look at it that way. So this is proven, as a test. That's this has passed the test, the big one or the big test. And I also look at that. I agree with the approach to look at the traditional and also the history, where we have also a history about the social distancing, where Amr ibn As, which having had the experience before with the pandemic at the time, and use the approach of social distancing. So we do have that experience, and then it is alhamdulillah, we just realized that we do have that that situation before, and then we use it in making the policy either by Muhammadiyah or also by the nation. And at the time also, I will say that at the beginning, our government put the economics priority rather than the life, where we can see they put the policy inviting influencer, asking people to go for the vacation or holiday because no people come to the recreation sport. There's a wrong approach that used the government at the beginning, but then it's corrected by Muhammadiyah and other people who put the rural first. So this is the first moment that I look at. And the second one, I observe what happened in Qatar, where the committee to not allow for whiskey drunk, to go to the field, and also for the LGBT. It is proven also at the time that very few sexual harassment, very few crime during the event of the World Cup compared to before. So I will say that the truth will find its way. So it is a better approach rather than the others. So I agree that we develop our society looking at the tradition and looking at the what has been technology as that's what we did before. We use Maqasid Sharia and also consult that with the medical and those who with the science which learn about the pandemic, and that shows that we go for the success. Now the question next, I think, what next? I think that's we've known that it is proven and has passed the test, and what next for us to lead the society? And I believe there are lots of problems around us, and also besides that, also about the advance of technology, and also I agree with you said we study what we put at that for the institutionalized. This may be what we don't have so far in our research on poverty. We've done a lot of research on poverty, but we do not able to get rid of poverty because it is not institutionalized, I believe. So this maybe I agree with it one. And perhaps one thing from Jasser Auda, I would like to ask, perhaps you can tell your experience with your Maqasid Sharia Institute, how you develop a research and how you put it in the institutionalized in the policy. Perhaps you can share with us and then can tell the success story of that one. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Jazakumullah khair, barakallahu feekum. I totally agree that the prioritization that the Maqasid al-Sharia gives is very important for fatwa. When you give fatwa as a Majelis Tarjih, how you are going to prioritize. You mentioned you prioritize the life of the people or you prioritize the economy. It could be the role of the government to look for the economy, but as ulama who give a fatwa, of course, you have to prioritize human life over anything else. The rest is not as important from the Islamic point of view. On the other hand, I would say that I think we need to expand our approach from the fatwa to the system itself. So if a strategic fatwa, basically, and to look at the bigger picture as well. So I totally agree with everything you mentioned, Sternal, Akhunan. Lakin I'm just saying that when you look at the bigger picture, you realize that the economics priority for the policy actually made a major problem for middle classes everywhere. The middle classes coming out of the pandemic are much smaller and much weaker, even in industrialized societies. The hit that was done to the small businesses for the sake of the bigger businesses and the bigger wealths coming out much richer out of the vaccine issues. Of course, the smaller ones are kind of the same, but the bigger ones are much richer. It made a major transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich, basically. That is the outcome of the pandemic economically. And we need to look at this apparatus, how it works, so that we avoid that. In my reading of what happened economically, it was a major opportunity for people of major wealth to jump on the opportunity and transfer more wealth in their pockets, and becoming much more like the gap becoming much bigger between the rich and the poor. And I think that this is a major problem that we need to address as we address the pandemics and its fatwas. The issue of the impact of the pandemic on Islamic organizations and how the dynamics of Islamic charities changed because of the pandemic is a major concern as well, because pre-pandemic charities operated in a particular way, and post-pandemic, many Islamic projects were simply closed because they could not find the funding, because the funding was from the excess of the excess of the excess. And when there is less excess with the strata right after the middle class, or the middle class, then it became a major problem. And most of the Islamic organizations we deal with today operate on almost zero budget, or these kinds of things we start to hear about. And therefore, it requires strategizing. How can we fix the impact of the pandemic on Islamic organizations? Because the way I see it is that now the Islamic organizations that could generate revenue are surviving, and the Islamic organizations that could generate less or no revenue are not surviving. And usually the ones who generate revenue are producing a service to the people. And these are less important than the organizations that do not give a service, that are concerned about the Ummah and its culture and its thought, and about the stuff that we call ibadah and sha'air, and this is not commercial. So I see that there is a shift in the pandemic between, like, from the non-commercial Islamic work to the commercial Islamic work, and entertainment-based, and the excitement-based and the therapy-based Islamic work, versus the genuine Islamic work that is trying to change the world. In addition to the grab of the politics, not just the people of big wealth, but politicians too. In Palestine, the occupation grabbed so much land during COVID. In the Arab world, every politician who doesn't like certain opposition had the opportunity to imprison the opposition during the COVID, just like that. And people are not really aware of what is happening, so they grab the opportunity from, you name it, without getting into it. So basically, we're talking about the bigger picture. We need to study, and how can we reverse that? Your question, Sidi, on what is next. I'm talking in an Islamic movement today, and that is one of the major keys of what is next. What is next is the Islamic movements, because the Islamic movements are able to change for the sake of Islam. Outside the Islamic movements, very, very few people carry the burden of Islam and care about Islam. And that's why Islamic movements are always a problem for the enemies of Islam. Even if they are peaceful and civil and there is nothing that is threatening to their balance of power, but they know that the soft power that the Islamic movements have is very dangerous. So what is next is for the Islamic movement to rethink its social strategy. How can we impact the society in a way that supports the social change that we want, the social change? How can we go from the individual to the institutions? How can we protect our institutions from slipping into the entertainment paradigm? How can we protect our education from slipping into the market-driven paradigm? Because the movement is different. The national universities could serve the market and the economy. But yeah, the Islamic movement should not be based on serving the market, but rather serving its own objectives from the society. That's a movement. That's how you do it. And therefore, the advice is for the movement to think how it could stay genuine to its objectives and not slip into the ways that many Islamic organizations and many governments slipped under the pressure of the reality of post-COVID. In terms of your question about research, what we do, humbly, we started the research efforts just a few years back, so we are not as developed as we want. But what we do, we look for talent. We look for research talents, and we form networks of researchers. We have something called the Maqasid Research Network. So far, we have 1,000 members, or how many now? Probably 1,000, more than 1,000 members. But not all of them are trained to do research this way. We're training bit by bit. I guess so far we trained about a couple hundred of them. And a couple hundred of them doing PhD or masters or doing research or writing in our journal, they are now approaching Islam in a different way. So we try to go make a movement, but movement of research that is based not on study circles, but based on research circles. And so we have a circle that studies AI and tries to look at that. We have a research circle that looks at education, early child education. We have a research circle that looks at architecture. So whenever we find talent, we try to form a circle and we give them a mandate. And the most importantly, we teach them the approach. How? So that they remain genuine to the objective. Sorry, a long answer.
Thank you. Berikutnya Ustaz Ihsan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Muhammad Ihsan from OMG. I have 3 questions. The first one, you have talked about the restructuring knowledge, but I think you should give further explanation to how to do it. What are the steps to restructure knowledge? This is one. And the second question, allow me to ask about LGBT. I don't stop thinking why Western society accept the LGBT. Is it a sign of the fall of Western culture, or what? What I think also about our people, Muslim people, who also do the same thing, the LGBT. Even I have read in the hadith inna akhwafa ma akhafu ala ummati amalu qawmi Lut. Why also we follow them in this activity. And the last question is about ad-daruriyatul khams. Ma ra'yukum fi ad-daruriyatul khams? Hal min mazid am yani baqiyat yani al-khams faqat? Yani fi ra'yikum hal hunaka daruriyat ukhra ghayra hadil khams? Thank you.
Barakallahu fikum. In terms of restructuring knowledge, how? We have here in this book some sort of a manual, but if I may say, in disciplinary studies, how is actually, it says it starts by assessing the theoretical foundation of the discipline. So basically, you start to assess the theoretical foundations in relation to the objectives of the Quran and the Sunnah. The objectives must not contradict the revelation. So why anthropology? Why psychology? Why economics? What are the objectives of the science? Is the start of the restructuring of knowledge. Why are we studying materials? Why are we studying chemistry? And this is a start question that would make us think about the objectives of the discipline. And then we say all disciplines express foundational concepts and concerns. Secondly, the conceptual framework of the discipline. The discipline of psychology defines the human, defines sickness and health, defines the mentality, defines the brain, defines the heart, defines certain things. What are the conceptual framework of the science, and how we can rethink? So we're saying here the rethinking of the foundational conceptual frameworks is itself an exercise of reconstruction. Since concepts are the building blocks of describing reality at all levels. So how to describe, how to analyze, how to prescribe, how to explain, how to predict, all of this is tied to the conceptual framework. So once you have your own conceptual framework of sociology, you are dealing with the society in a different way. And then the same critical assessment journey is undertaken regarding the parties or actors in the theories of the discipline. So نظريات العلم, نظريات الأصول, like if we're talking fiqh, the أصول الفقه, the نظريات of it. One of them is the Maqasid, Sharia that you mentioned. Is this enough, or do we need to restructure some of that? And then we look at Sunan al-Ilahiyya, the meta theories. The disciplines have meta theories and high level processes associated with it. From the Islamic point of view, disciplinary productions must account for and yield to applicable universal laws. السنة الإلهية والنظريات الكبرى في العلم, and we tie to that. القيم, values resulting from the application of the methodology, offer a moral yardstick against which the values that are internal to each discipline must be measured. So al-qiyam and the impact of al-qiyam. Finally, positive and negative comments and so forth. So basically, how to restructure is what we do in terms of the methodology. Your second question, why is Western society doing that? A simple answer is al-kufr wal-iman. Just kufr is bad, man. Kufr is bad. And kufr develops, the kuffar could be disciplined. And when they are disciplined, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from his sunnah, that they succeed. The Romans built a great empire. The Greeks, the pharaohs, they are disciplined. They are kuffar and they might have some problems. But my view as a Canadian who lives in Canada, when Canadians were disciplined 100 years ago, 150, Canada's 150 years old, when they founded this country, and men were men and women were women, and they built their settlements, and regardless of what happened before to the natives and so on. And they built very well. They built the country very well. And for them, they had certain values upon which the country became a successful country, a major economy. But now they are losing these values. And I, as a citizen of this country, I'm concerned, because when you lose the values, you look at the next generation and they are not as builders as the previous generation. But to me, this is just kufr and iman, because if you are kuffar and you are building an institution, if you don't protect it with iman and akhlaq and the model of Islam, basically Islam, and of course they benefited from the common ground between Christianity and Islam. They benefited from the commonalities. For example, the institution of marriage was very strong in Canada, for example, where I live. But now the institution of marriage is very weak, not just with the fahisha people, but with basically even the normal marriage. It's not very popular anymore. And kids are everywhere from illegal marriages and divorce, etc. So basically, you're talking about a society, in my view, that is disintegrating morally. And it's because people did not find faith on a wider scale. We're also seeing a manifestation of the current systems that cause people trauma. And a lot of the fahisha people are basically coming from a traumatic background, trauma of rape, trauma of incest, family problems. These are traumas that could lead to this. If you want to analyze it from an Islamic point of view, it's not a natural thing, it's a psychological problem. The natural thing is no, like, you know, the confusion, what we call mukhannath in fiqh. We're not talking about that. The LGBT question is not the mukhannath question. Mukhannath are people who, Allah forbid, are created with, you know, both conflicting kind of male and female in the same person. That is very rare. And that's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about is moral deviation, not physical, nothing natural about this. This is just بل أنتم قوم مسرفون. Prophet Lut told them, you are people who are extravagant. And I think that partly is what the society did, especially with males, with boys. Boys, the way they are doing their life today, will have a major problem with their masculinity because of the time they spend on games, because of the less time they spend with nature, because of the tyranny of the systems on males. Males are less males in these very organized societies and so forth. And most of the people who change their gender and so on, if you look in the statistics in the West, 80%, 90% of them are males. Very few females cross that line, 10%. But 90% of these operations are done by males who want to give up their masculinity. I think it's part of the tyranny of the system. The system is democratic politically, but it is tyrannical socially. Socially, it is crushing manhood. And why do we have this in some Muslim countries? Because we are following their steps. We are crushing manhood. I come from the Arab world. Look at what the Arab world did after the Arab Spring. They crushed any male who want to stand up and say this is right and this is wrong, who doesn't like the aggression of the police, any of these things. They end up in prison forever, not just for 1 year or two. So these are systems, whether they know it or not, that are crushing manhood in the Arab world. And therefore, many of the Arabs of our kids, who are our relatives who are in the Arab world, the boys are not going out growing as boys anymore and as tough males. They're very soft. And that is a problem that is socially causing issues. أما سؤالك سيدي سألت بالعربية فلعلي أرد عليك يعني الخاص بالضرورات فمقاصد الشريعة أعتبرها من القواعد وليست من الأصول. بمعنى أن الفقه قد تطور إلى أن وصلنا إلى مرحلة التنظير للمقاصد، فنظر العلماء للمقاصد بناء على الفقه. يعني قال الإمام الشاطبي: إنما وضعت هذا بناء على استقرائي لجزئيات الشريعة، ويعني بالشريعة الفقه المالكي في استقرائه، فوضع المقاصد كقواعد استنبطها من الفقه. أما المقاصد في رأيي الأصلية فهي مقاصد القرآن، لأن مقاصد القرآن في أصول الفقه وليست في قواعده، ليست بعد الفقه، هي قبل الفقه. فأتفق معك أن الضرورات والحاجيات والتحسينيات نظرية مهمة، ولكنها ليست كافية. لا يصح إلا أن نعود إلى مقاصد القرآن، سنجد فيها الضرورات والحاجات والتحسينيات وحفظ الدين والنفس والعقل والمال والعرض وسد الذرائع والمصالح، سنجد هذا في القرآن. ولكن سنجد أيضا من القرآن ما يعرف مقاصد الإنسانية ومقاصد الأنعام ومقاصد الزراعة ومقاصد العمارة ومقاصد السياسة، وسنجد منظومة مقاصدية في كتاب الله سبحانه وتعالى أعلى بكثير من كل ما نجم في تاريخنا من نظريات بناء على التقعيد الفقهي. فهذه لعلها إن شاء الله درس آخر، كيف يمكن أن نستبدل منظومة مقاصد الشريعة بمقاصد القرآن، لأن مقاصد الشريعة هي جزء من مقاصد القرآن على أي حال، لكن مقاصد القرآن أوسع وهي أنجع في التعامل مع مشكلاتنا الحالية التي نعاني منها، التي تتعلق غالبا بالمنظومات الواقعية أكثر مما تتعلق بالجزئيات الفقهية في الفتاوى. والله أعلم لعل هذا. نعم طبعا، نعم الضرورات ليست فقط حفظ الدين. أي نعم نعم. بالأمس كان عندنا يعني مناقشة في معهد المقاصد، وقلت للإخوة والأخوات يعني أنني كتبت عن مقاصد الشريعة من 20 عاما وغيرت أشياء كثيرة، منها هذه، منها أن المقاصد أوسع كثيرا من الضرورات الخمس. الضرورات من النفس والعقل والمال والعرض. قلت لهم مثلا حفظ المال أقل ضرورة من إنفاق المال. إنفاق المال هو الأصل في القرآن، ثم يأتي حفظ المال مثلا. فانتقدت حفظ المال بهذه الطريقة. من الضرورات أيضا الأمة والحكم. الحرية من التبرير، لأن كلمة الحرية ليس لها سلطان، هي ليست موجودة في كتاب الله، فلا بد أن نعرف ما تعريف الحرية في الإسلام. الحر بالحر والعبد بالعبد هذه قضية أخرى. أما الحرية بمعنى إني نذرت لك ما في باطني محررة، الحرية هي عبادة الله سبحانه وتعالى. الحرية تقسم في النظريات الاجتماعية المعاصرة بالحرية الاقتصادية والاجتماعية، يعني السوشيال فريدم، الايكونوميك فريدم، البوليتيكال فريدم، هكذا يقسمون نظرية الحرية. الحرية في الإسلام تختلف، لأن الحرية في الإسلام لا تنقسم إلى حرية سياسية واقتصادية واجتماعية، وإنما الحرية في عبودية المؤمن لله تعالى وعدم احتياجه إلى الناس. إني نذرت لك ما في باطني محررا. الحرية من الاستعمار أو الاحتلال هذه من مقاصد الإسلام طبعا، لكن إذا عرفناها من خلال القرآن وجدنا أنها تعرف بشكل أفضل من أن نعرفها بالحرية السياسية أو economic political freedom أو political emancipation. نحتاج إلى أن نعي الفرق بين النظريات الحرية الإسلامية ونظريات الحرية التي تخدم منظومة أخرى. الحرية الاقتصادية مثلا economic freedom، هذه economic freedom تخدم منظومة مختلفة عن المنظومة الإسلامية. الله أعلم.
Baik, silakan Ustaz Fatah, lalu nanti dan ketiga nanti Mas yang di belakang.
شكرا.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The first question is to Brother Rofiq. Your subject is the integration of tradition and modernity. But why don't you tell us what is tradition? Okay, I didn't hear from you the explanation of tradition. But in your conclusion, it is important, to study Islamic intellectual legacy. I think it is tradition, but you don't tell us what is tradition. So, what I'm going to ask you, why, for example, you don't use the theory of tradition from Said Hussein Nasr, for example, because the meaning of tradition, according to him, is not the opposite of modernity. There is a special meaning of tradition, and I think the meaning of tradition, according to him, is good to understand the modernity. And the second one, I ask you, brother, but allow me to ask you in Arabic. In Majelis Tarjih, في مجلس الترجيح في مجلس الترجيح والتجديد نحن نستنبط الأحكام من غير الأحكام الفروعية مباشرة. نحن نستنبط الأحكام من القيم الأساسية وبعد ذلك الأصول الكلية وبعدهما نحن نستنبط الفروع الأحكام الفروعية. كما عرفنا أن المفسر طاهر بن عاشور طاهر ابن عاشور ألف الكتاب مقاصد الشريعة الإسلامية، وهو كتب في كتابه أربع قيم: الفطرة، المشاهة أو التسامح، المساواة، ورابعا الحرية. كيف رأيكم؟ هل استطعنا أن نأخذ هذه القيم الأربع كالقيم الأساسية في المقاصد الشرعية في المقاصد في المقاصد الشرعية. وسؤال ثاني، هل أنتم موافق برأيه أن يكون المقاصد الشرعية كعلم وحيد ليس من فرع أصول الفقه؟ لابد أن يكون المقاصد الشرعية مستقل من أصول الفقه. شكرا.
بارك الله فيكم. نعم، أعرف أنكم في مجلس الترجيح في المحمدية تنطلقون من الأصول إلى الفروع، وهذا جزء من التوافق بيننا في الفقه. يعني حين أقرأ، يعني أنا أشتغل في الفتوى، فحين نبحث في فتوى معينة في مجلس أمريكا الشمالية أو مجلس أوروبي نعود إلى مجامع الإفتاء، فعدت مثلا إلى كتابكم عن المياه في بعض ما كان، وعدنا إلى ما ذكرتموه أيام الكوفيد الكورونا في لكم منشور في فقه الكورونا شيء. فأعلم أنكم تنطلقون من الأصول إلى الفروع، وهذه طريقتي. يعني بعض الإخوة الذين يشتغلون بالفتوى ينطلقون من الأدلة الجزئية إلى الفروع الأحكام، وتعلمنا من أساتذتنا أن ننطلق من الأصول إلى الأحكام. أستاذنا الشيخ القرضاوي مثلا رحمه الله كان يؤصل قبل أن يفتي، فيقول مثلا إذا أفتى في شيء خاص بالمعاملات المالية يقول أصول المعاملات المالية، ثم في النهاية يقول الفتوى، أصول فقه الأقليات ثم الفتوى، أصول كذا ثم الفتوى. وهذا هو السليم، لأن الانطلاق من الأصول إلى الفروع هو المنهج القرآني. القرآن ليس تجزئيا كما أنزلنا على المحتسبين الذين جعلوا القرآن عضين، فنحن نقطع أحيانا القرآن وننظر إلى آية ونصف آية، لكن انطلقنا من الأصول فنحن نركب ونوصل بين ما أمر الله به أن يوصل، فأتفق تماما. أما طاهر بن عاشور فهو ينطلق من عالمه ومن فقهه. طاهر بن عاشور إذا قرأت ما كتبه في كتابه عن الحرية، وله مقالة مستقلة اسمها الحرية، هو يقول إنه تأثر بالفكرة الفرنسية عن الليبرتي، وأظن أن هذه شجاعة منه أن يعترف بهذا، لكن هذا يدل على أن الفقيه قد يتأثر بالأفكار السائدة، لكن ليس في القرآن مفهوم الحرية. هناك معنى الحرية كما قلت العبودية لله، لكن مفهوم الحرية ليس مفهوما قرآنيا. والمساواة أيضا، مفهوم المساواة ليس في القرآن مساواة. نحن سواء لأننا لأن الله عز وجل فضل بعضنا على بعض، لكن القرآن لم يفضل. تلك الرسل فضلنا بعضهم على بعض، بعضهم أفضل من بعض في بعض الأمور. لا تفضلوني على يونس بن متى كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. الرجال ليسوا أفضل من النساء، قال الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض، لم يقل بما فضل الله الرجال على النساء. هناك بعض الرجال أفضل وبعض النساء أفضل، ورفعنا بعضكم فوق بعض درجات ليتخذ بعضكم بعضا سخريا. فأنا أتخذه سخريا في أشياء وهو يتخذني سخريا في أشياء، فلأن هذا التسخير نحن مسخرون لبعضنا، فليس هناك أفضلية لا الرجال على النساء ولا الأغنياء على الفقراء ولا الأقوياء على الضعفاء ولا أصحاب العاهة عن ميسر، كلنا سواء بهذا المعنى. أما المساواة في إيجاليتي هذه الفرنسية التي انطلق منها أستاذ وأساتذتنا طاهر بن عاشور، فمع كل الاحترام هي من فلسفة الثورة الفرنسية التي لا تلزمنا بالضرورة. فهل الانطلاق من القيم مفيد؟ نعم طبعا، لكن القيم في القرآن طبعا الفطرة، وقال التسامح وما جعل عليكم في الدين من حرج، هذه إسلامية، والفطرة فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها. لكن القيم في الإسلام من القرآن أوسع. قيم الجمال مثلا، الزينة والزخرف والحسن والجمال، هذه كلها قيم في الإسلام. قيم الأخلاق، الكرم، المغفرة، العفو، الرحمة، العدل، القسط، هذه قيم في الأخلاق. وقيم في المنافع، اسمهما أكبر من نفعهما، النفع والضرر وما أصابك وما اكتسبت، الكسب، هذه كلها قيم. فالقيم أوسع من الأربعة التي نظر لها أستاذ أساتذتنا طاهر بن عاشور، لكنه إذا انطلقت أنا من منظور معين وكلمت تحدثت عن القيم، وأتحدث عن عالمي وعن ما هو مهم، وقد يأتي شخص بعدي يقول لا هو تأثر بقضايا معينة. كلنا في الفقه نتأثر، لكن المساواة والحرية لا أتفق معها. هل المقاصد سؤالك علم مستقل؟ هذه الأسئلة الثنائية أنا منهجيا ضد هذه الأسئلة، لأن الثنائيات الفلسفية في نظري تختلف عن منطق القرآن. القرآن ليس فيه كذا أو كذا فقط، إلا الإيمان والكفر. الإيمان والكفر فقط أبيض وأسود، إنما القرآن ليس أبيض وأسود تماما. يتحدث عن أهل الكتاب ثم يقول ليسوا سواء، من أهل الكتاب أمة قائمة وإن من أهل الكتاب لمن يؤمن بالله وما أنزل إليكم. يتحدث عن الألوان والأشكال. القرآن ليس فيه ثنائيات، دايكوتومي، هذا ليس قرآن. وبالتالي علم المقاصد جزء من أصول الفقه، وهو علم مستقل، وهو جزء من الاقتصاد، وهو جزء من السياسة، وهو جزء من الظواهر، وهو جزء من الاستراتيجيات، وهذه كلها دوائر متداخلة. يعني المنطق الذي تحدثت عنه في مقدمة هذا الكتاب يعتبر التصنيفات كلها دوائر متداخلة intersecting circles and not dichotomies and not compartments. فهو the logic يعني if I may in English the logic that we propose in the Maqasid methodology is not a dichotomous logic, and there is no dichotomous question that we entertain except for faith and kufr and disbelief, belief and disbelief. But other than belief in Allah and disbelief, everything is actually in colors and in levels. And you cannot really say, because I am Shafi'i, I'm not Hanafi, and because I am Sunnah, I'm not Shia, and because no, these dichotomies do not define reality, and they don't reflect haqq, they don't reflect truth. They reflect تحيزات, they reflect angles that we take. إلا متحرفا لقتال أو متحيزا إلى فئة. قد نتحيز يعني أقول يعني I bias, these are biases, but these are not Quranic. الله أعلم.
Thank you, Professor Jasser Auda, and for the question from Pak Abdul Fattah. Before answering the questions, I would like to address I think it's also good news from Professor Jasser, that our bayanat on COVID and our book on Fiqhul Miyah has been read by the scholars, and they, learn something from that. It's good news from us, and we are thankful. We have been in communication as well with FCMA in general. In just a few days, we are going to have our national meeting of Majelis Tarjih. We initially want to invite you, but unfortunately, you are going to be leaving on Friday as well. But hopefully we can make it next time. Inshallah, we will be listening the lecture from Dr. Zulfikar Alisha. Especially the topic that we are going to be discussing is on the idea of astronomical calculation, al-hisab al-falaki. And currently, we are trying to improve our criteria. Right now, we are relying on the idea of ikhtilaful matali' or national criteria. I think we are one ummah, and we are really considering that we need to have a global unified calendar. So Dr. Zulfikar has authored a book on this issue, and then we are going to have a discussion with him, and we are happy to listen from you as well if you have any thought on this issue. The question from Pak Fatah was about the definition of tradition. In a simple term, tradition is just anything that come before modern period. So tradition is also an epoch or time, but also tradition could be defined as a set of ideas, a set of paradigm. If we define modernity with the idea of progress, al-infisal min al-madi, then tradition is insisting or benefiting from the past. That is a tradition. I'm also aware there are many definitions of tradition, but I'm more familiar with the definition formulated by the scholar by the name of Talal Asad. In fact, I wrote my dissertation on the idea of usurpation, relying on his idea of discursive tradition. Essentially, tradition is not a single phenomenon. We cannot essentialize tradition. There are manifestations with plural. It's just a plural phenomenon. You have madhahib, you have many thoughts, pluralities, and sometimes we try to essentialize, we try to restrict the definition of tradition as if tradition is only one. In reality, there are many thoughts coming from the past. What we need to do is to look at them in the light of the Quran, as what our Sheikh just saying. We need to sort we need to choose the best opinion coming from the past according to our situation, the opinion that solve our current problem today. Finally, I want to give a comment on the idea of al-hurriyah as well, Dr. Jasser. You know, don't you think that we need to give emphasis? We need to emphasize on the idea of political liberation, considering that we Muslim societies, especially the Arab world, are still living in the very authoritarian world. You are, I mean, you are the author of the book Al-Istibdad. I have, you know, I have a worry that if we belittle the idea, the notion of al-hurriyah, then you are not giving an optimism to our brothers in Egypt, to our brothers in Syria. I think we need to give them a hope. I mean, ghoba an mabhatil ulama fi misra al-bahath al-hurriyah. They don't think that freedom is important. I think we need to give a little bit source of hope by, you know, al-hurriyah is also part of Maqasid. We need to work, especially political freedom. That's my opinion.
In terms of the اختلاف المطالع and the using calculations, I think this is a very good step forward, and Dr. Zulhijjah will be the best person to talk about that. In the North American Council of Fiqh, he was our ambassador to a meeting in Turkey between the European Council for Fatwa, I was a member of that as well, and the ANAD in Turkey a couple of years back. And the ANAD is actually doing calculations based on very advanced technology and so on. And in the Fiqh Council of Europe, and then the Fiqh Council of North America, and many of the local councils and masajid, now we just go by calculation. We believe that the new moon is a natural phenomenon. إن عدة شهور عند الله 12 شهرا في كتاب الله يوم خلق السماوات والأرض منها 4 حرم. From the day he created the heavens and earth, he made 12 months. This is a natural phenomenon. It's not ibadah to go look for the moon. This is something that is, but because the Prophet ﷺ said, "Sumu liru'yatihi," so we calculate the visibility of the moon, not the birth of the moon. Because from the birth to the visibility, you might have a few minutes or a few hours. So we calculate the visibility of the moon when it is visible by the eye. But if we have clouds and the moon is up there, we know it's up there, 100%. There is no doubt about the equations. And we can calculate. So we go by the calculation. Alhamdulillah, most of the Western world now just goes by calculation. And I could add that in the Arab world, we go by calculation. Well, they say that on TV, they say, according to calculation, it's on Wednesday, but we will confirm on Tuesday. And every time on Tuesday, they confirm the calculation. Like they say the same now in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia. On TV, they say that according to calculation, but now the Ifta is going to confirm. This is the new. Because some of the scholars are still on the Al-Qadim, you know, Al-Madhab Al-Qadim. Some of the scholars, and in some countries, it's a folklore. Like for example, in South Africa, we have a project there for education and so on. In South Africa, it's a folklore that they go out in Cape Town and they look for the moon and then they play drums. And so it's part of their culture, I guess. So when I told them, for example, about the calculation, they said, no, but it's a big celebration for Muslims, and non-Muslims come and celebrate with us. Okay, fine, if it's a folklore. But the moon is a natural phenomenon. So inshallah, you will have, inshallah, a good session with Dr. Zulhijjah, our dear brother. In terms of al-hurriyah, I have allergy from the hijacking of the concepts. I have a problem of the Arab kids dying for al-hurriyah, and al-hurriyah is not an Islamic concept this way. Why? Because perhaps they should revise the whole system, not just revise the influence of the international politics on the nation state. That's in the Arab world. I think in East Asia here you have stable systems, alhamdulillah. And I think you should keep that. But as an Arab, I would say that we need to revise the whole thing. This is not working. This nationalism is not working anymore. And because there is no room for nationalism to be genuine. When we used to have tyrants but are nationalists, there was some good in the societies. They cared about the people. But now we have nationalism that is very harmful. So I still insist on the Quranic word, which is al-Mashi'a or al-Istiqlal. Mashi'a is the Quranic expression of Hurriya. Al-Irada Sha'biyya, al-Irada. This is also Arabic we use. So al-Irada Sha'biyya is our will as a people. But al-Hurriya, al-Siyasiyya, and so on, is thinking still within the Sykes-Picot kind of worldview. And I think the Sykes-Picot worldview has been very harmful on us in the Arab world. And it's good that Arabs think about unions in a better way. And these lines, instead of dividing Sudan more and dividing Arabia and dividing Palestine and dividing, we need to bring back some of the divisions back. And I think if you talk about the irada sha'biyya, or the will of the people, that would be more effective than al-hurriya al-wataniyya or al-hurriya al-siyasiyya that has to do with, but I agree with you, inshallah. You continue to talk about hurriya here. It's good. It's good. Inshallah.
Would love to hear the remarks or remarks from the guy.
جزاكم الله خير.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, of course, I am incredibly honored to be here. And I discovered, subhanAllah, it's a small world. One of my dearest friends in my city in Nashville, Tennessee, is our dear brother Jimmy Adian Shah, who is a member of the Executive Committee for Muhammadiyah in America. And he is I work with him in so many projects. He's alhamdulillah, the same masjid, alhamdulillah. So this is a small world, alhamdulillah. Of course, this is about 30 years ago. I was here and visited the Muhammadiyah University in Jakarta and Yogyakarta. So this is for me a reunion, alhamdulillah. I'm very glad. And of course, I think my father, and who was one of the founders of Triple IT, had some, interaction. So this is all, alhamdulillah. It's a long family tradition to be working together, inshallah, close with Muhammadiyah organization. It's really an honor for me. So this is how we're trying to bring the Quran and center the Quran Kareem in every one of these discussions. So we are talking about Hurriya. As we said, Hurriya is really led to Fawda, al-Fawda al-Akhlaqiyya, this moral chaos. But where is al-Karamat al-Insan? So that is a much more powerful concept than Hurriya. It is actually purposeful. Hurriya has no purpose. Hurriya is that it is maybe anarchy can be a form of Hurriya. Is this really what we want? And this is why the whole thing is libertarian tendencies in America, which is really chaos. People who are it's not only just want to own guns, they want to own tanks. And if you allow them to own tanks, they want to own F-16s. And if you allow that, they want to have submarines and nuclear weapons. And then because you see it's chaos. There is no limit to it. So that is the danger of al-Hurriya. Now, again, we have a much more powerful concept called وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Everywhere. It is something that can unite all of humanity. Al-Karama wa al-Rahma. Compassion is an even stronger and more all-encompassing concept. And this is why every single surah except one in the Quran Kareem, we have, and there's, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, because that is really a component of everything we do. Like, we said, can we change, for example, the debate about climate and, all the environmental damage that we have? Because right now it's a zero-sum game when we say climate justice. And we go back and forth, so that a European country may offer a few $1 million. And when they offer some money, wallahi, it is like not even a pocket change. So why don't we talk about climate compassion, or compassion with every one of Allah's creation? Because that is something that every single human being understands naturally by fitrah. By fitrah, we see an animal suffering, we feel bad for it. Sometimes we see even a tree being cut for no reason and we feel bad. That is innate fitrah in us. So sometimes what we try to advocate here and tell everybody, let's change the whole conversation and regain leadership, moral and intellectual leadership in all spheres. Right now, we are still reacting. Oh, they have hurriya. Do we have hurriya? Oh, alhamdulillah, we have hurriya too. Let's all be happy now. We are just like you. I mean, this is why when we have something that is muhaymin, a lot better than what is being imported from the West. Now, I would like to make a quick comment on LGB, so on, so on, so on, so on. I mean, the thing here is that, why are we surprised? There is absolutely nothing surprising with the state of affairs that we are in right now, because there's absolutely no reference. This is what it means to be liberal. Now, perhaps, like 150 years, we had a purpose, maybe, but the challenge and the mess happened from the moment of the Renaissance. From that moment onward. And just like, Gandhi said when he was asked about Western civilization, what do you think about that? And he answered, like, it would be a good idea. So we have this fascination. Like, I had this long conversation with a friend who's like, it's like, oh, this is a civilization based on logic. And I said, what is really, do you live your life by logic? Do you treat your family and your children by pure logic? That is a fantasy. That we created a god, a sanam, and we are making it sacred when it is absolutely, there's nothing sacred about pure logic, and even pure logic, and that's another fallacy. Do we have two philosophers who agree on on what? What do they even agree on? So suddenly we created a sanam, but the sanam is actually just like the time of the pre-Jahiliyyah time. We ended up with 360 sanam everywhere. Same thing with this idea of logic, ended up with plurality of ideas and lack of absolute any reference to anything. So it is again a world of chaos. So we can change this. This is actually a momentous time for Muslims to connect with the Quran Kareem at a much deeper and serious level than anything that has happened before. And really, there is a way, inshallah, if we put our hands together. And this is, so one of the things I would like usually tell everybody, like, if you think the Muslim Ummah is in trouble, if you think humanity is in trouble, then multiply that by 10. Because the more you know about really what's happening in the world, it's a lot worse than you think. It's a lot worse than we think. However, if we look at the potential in the Muslim Ummah, I tell you, it is many, many folds more than the size of the problems we face. In Tansurullah yansurkum. We have all the talent, but we just need kind of, put our hands together, synergize effort, inshallah, put a strategy, put a plan to go to be proactive. بعونه تعالى. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and bless everybody here. Jazakumullah khair, and thank you for asking for this comment, inshallah.
Ya, masih ada dua penanya yang tadi sudah. Mungkin singkat saja ya Ustaz dan Mas di belakang.
Assalamualaikum. Well, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Iwan Satewa, the Dean, Faculty of Law, Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta. I address my question to all speakers, but especially for Dr. Jasser Auda. I started reading the book and article on the Islamization of knowledge since 2000 when I took my master program in International Islamic University, Malaysia. So, in fact, it has been discussed by many scholars since 70 or 80, right? So, do you have any survey on making the assessment in which Islam, a Muslim society that successful pursuing the goal of the Islamization program? Because we need to know about this rank, because we need to learn from the country, right? That maybe they have been successful to conduct this program. Because when I'm doing my research on appointment of justice, I have to go to Germany, I have to go to Taiwan or South Korea and other countries, because I don't have sufficient reference to look at the Muslim countries that have a good example of in the issue of the appointment of justice, that the judiciary is very independent and the judges having integrity, for something like that. So do you have any survey looking at or observe the Muslim countries that successful in conducting what we are discussing on Islamization of knowledge? And the second one, what is the current problem and obstacle of the Muslim world nowadays in pursuing these goals? Yeah, having a better society, right? More Islamic society. What are the problems of the Muslim Ummah nowadays? Thank you very much.
Mungkin langsung saja dulu. Silakan.
Thank you. Okay, so my question also for both extraordinary speakers. Okay, so I would like to ask about the linguistic hegemony of Arabic texts. The linguistic hegemony of Arabic text. It feels to be daunting, so it would not exaggeration to state that almost all modern legal thinkers attempting to make sense of Islamic law in the base of modernity. And Rashid Rida is one of the first modern legal reformers, resorted to a notion of maslahah that culminated in a new total abandonment of revealed text for the sake of utilitarian construction of positive law, and also the intellectual Pakistani Fazlur Rahman performed his double movement theory. It is a thought to clear the hegemony, and then Fazlur Rahman project is about the context and general intentionalities. And so this statement mentioned by Wael B. Halak in his article, Al-Maqasid and the Challenges of Modernity, and of وجدت أيضا معلومات يعني أخرى عندما قال الجاهل يعني more emphasize on the meaning. I mean في تكوين المعنى له علاقة قوية بين اللفظ والمعنى والعقد والخط. إذن هذه الأركان أو العناصر الأربعة تفسر المعنى معنى اللغة يعني نظاميا وانسجاميا. هذا نعم. وأيضا عندما جاء الشهيد سيد قطب in his theory about التصوير الفني القرآن, also Sayyid Qutb give more emphasis on the wahdatul lugha, wahdatul ma'na. So what's your opinion about this issue? Okay, thank you.
Inshallah, about the Islamization of knowledge, I am not aware of a report, particularly on the Islamization, like as a project, as like that surveys where the Islamization of the impact of the Islamization of knowledge. I know that it has a major impact. The Islamization of knowledge project has a major impact on many individuals and groups and governments and companies and movements, but I'm not aware of a report that puts statistics and so forth. The project of the Maqasid methodology is an extension of the Islamization of knowledge project. It's not exactly the same project. There are some differences that we discussed, but it's one of the outcomes of that project. And it is an outcome also of the Wasatiyah project that I believe is taking the Wasatiyah to further steps forward. The impact of ideas is difficult to gauge anyway. It's difficult to have like a real report or something. How can we resolve the problems? In my opinion, إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. It is a matter of changing the Ummah internally, because it is not a matter of changing the political system at the top, but it's rather changing the culture of the Ummah and the society and the education and al-ilm wal-amal wal-tasawwur wal-tasarruf, the individual and the group. And then this will eventually change the political system. But the political systems, given the technology of violence today, it's not possible to change simply, because politicians just make very, very simple decisions of eliminating the people. It's as simply as that. In terms of Rashid Rida and the Maslaha and so on, you translated the Maslaha as a utilitarian approach. And I believe there is a difference between Maslaha, Saliha, Yaslahu, Sulha, Islahan, and utility. Utility is rather material and is different. So the difference between utility and Maslaha is important, but I agree with the contribution of Rashid Rida, the contribution of Fadlur Rahman, and the intents and the context. And I think all of these scholars are pieces of the Tajdid that we have today. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when he talked about Tajdid, man yujaddidu laha is a group of people, it's not just one person. So many of the names that you mentioned and none mentioned are actually all Tajdid, part of the Tajdid that we need. And we need a lot of that. We need the Fadlur Rahmans and the Rashid Ridas and Hassan al-Bannas and Ghazalis and Qaradawi. We need everybody who believes in Tajdid so that they push Tajdid and Al-Faruqi, and I don't want to miss names, so many names, and all of them are part of that puzzle of Tajdid, not just one or two of them. In terms of Ta'wil al-Ma'na, I believe in that al-Ma'na, the basic Ma'na has to do with the sounds of the Arabic language. Al-Aswat wal-Ma'ani. I believe that this is a feature of the Arabic language that disappeared from the daughters of the Arabic language, such as Latin and Old English and Hebrew and Aramaic. I believe that these languages are daughters of the mother Arabic language. I don't believe in the Semitic languages theory. I think it's a very political theory, and I have a critique of it that I wrote recently. And therefore, the Arabic language has to do with the Arabic sound. And every sound has a meaning, and the combination of sounds cause the meaning to emerge in terms of sounds. And of course, the meaning is impacted by the linguistic culture as well. So kataba has to do with tying something. But we know that because of the culture of the Arabic tongue, kataba has to do with kitab and has to do with like as a book, as a promise. كتب ربكم على نفسه الرحمة كتب عليكم الصيام. So there is a link between the sounds and the linguistic culture, but I believe that the ma'na is the basic sounds. And of course, التصوير الفني, as Sayyid Qutb, صاحب الضلال الشهيد, has proposed, is very important, but at a higher level of the language, because he's looking at the structure, not just of the ayat, of the qasas and the surah. So he analyzes language at the higher level of the taswir and al-nizam, from al-Jahid all the way to al-Farahi and others, people who talked about al-nizam, Abdullah Draz. They also had a higher level of looking at the language. You find some people at a lower level, from Zamakhshari and a very linguistic approach, all the way to Ibn Ashur, actually, in Tahrir wa Tanwir, a very linguistic approach. But the linguistic approach of Ibn Ashur has to do with the Arabic poetry and the isti'mal al-lugha. So he's saying, this is the meaning, al-ma'na, and then he brings you shi'r from pre-Islam, post-Islam, to prove the linguistic ma'na. That's Ibn Ashur. But Zamakhshari is more into the urf al-Arab, how the Arabs use the meaning. And of course, there are mufassirun who divided over this, whether it is the urf al-Arab, and where do you get urf al-Arab, from the poetry or from the scholars who gave special care to the Quran, Mufradat al-Quran, for example, and so forth. So long story, but basically, my opinion, if you ask about mine, has to do with the basic sounds and how the sounds form the meaning. And I believe that this is the way of tajdid al-mafhum. If you want to renew the concept, you go back to the sounds, because the implication of the sound to the meaning is haqq, is mantiq. This is how I define mantiq, in fact. The nutq and mantiq has to do with the dilala, or the implication of the sounds to the meaning. And that is original in terms of Arabic, and would not allow foreign concepts to invade the space of the Quran in an apologetic way. So that is one of the ways we can protect the space of the Quranic concept from invasion from foreign concepts. Allah A'lam. Barakallahu feek.
I think I just want to intervene to one question only raised by Professor Iwan Satriawan, the Dean of Faculty of Law. He was asking about the current state of Islamization project. I don't have any specific data about countries that apply this method, but actually I'm wondering why the triple IT itself now has shifted I don't know, probably we can discuss it later on. I used to use the concept of Islamization of knowledge, but when I was a year student in summer school, 2018, I got a new publication by Ziauddin Sardar and Jeremy something, Hensel. We are moving now from Islamization to integration of knowledge. I believe that he says something in the book that the king is dead. I mean, the Islamization of knowledge is dead. I don't know what does that sentence mean, but the publication of triple IT now is changing. Leaving aside the idea of Islamization of knowledge, I personally, and this is what I want to advocate in the university, that we need to have multiple methodologies. Everything is acceptable. I mean, every methodology should be respected. Every methodology should be honored. If someone has the tendency, I want to apply Nasser, Science Nasser, not Nasser Zain. Don't worry. I want to apply, for example, Al Faruqi or our chef in Malaysia, Syed Atas, or I want to apply the methodology from Sheikh Jasser Auda. All are acceptable because what I see as reality is that the way we approach knowledge is just very secular. So we can accept all possibilities because we can say that as-sawab hunaka imkanan muta'addida yahtamil as-sawab yani kathir. Yes, that is the ijtihad issue. So I will let a scholar choose his own methodology, his own tendency. Everything is acceptable, but what I'm saying is that why in triple I itself the idea is no longer improving. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I would differentiate between Islamization of knowledge as a project and Islamization of knowledge as a triple IT institution itself. In terms of the project, there are many organizations that continue with the project of Islamization. Many universities, IIUM, we in the Maqasid Institute, we consider ourselves to be a proponent of Islamization of knowledge in our own version of it. Triple IT as an institution, it's best that you ask the institution itself. We are a different institution. Dr. Zaid is the son of one of the founders, but he is with a different institution. I worked, obviously, and all of the founders of Triple IT were, I consider them ustads of mine. But for the organization, it's better to ask the question to the organization itself. But for the project, no, it has many manifestations. And we are continuing the same project, inshallah, in a different version. Islamization 2.0.
Baik, syukron kepada semua, to all the audience that have contribute to our discussion today. Semoga semuanya dicatat Allah Subhanahu wa taala sebagai amal. Amin. Dan dengan berakhirnya sesi tanya jawab, maka berakhir juga diskusi kita pada kajian ketarjihan kontemporer yang dilaksanakan atas kerjasama Majelis Tajdid dan Tabligh Pimpinan Pusat Muhammadiyah dengan CISIC UMY. Dengan menghadirkan para ustadz kita di sini, tadi pembuka dari Ustadz Hamim, lalu kemudian Ustadz Rofiq dan Profesor Auda. Saya selaku moderator mengucapkan banyak permohonan maaf atas kekurangan kami dalam membimbing acara ini. Mari kita tutup dengan mengucapkan hamdalah. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Ada